Thank you. I said last week during middle school, fun fact, anytime I'm around technology, I break it. Like literally just being in my presence, it stops working. I don't know why that's the case, but it is. So, anyways, we're on week 2 of our Not Yet series. Does anyone remember? All right, we're just doing this because that's not going to work. Week 2 of our Not Yet series. Once again, a lot of work to get here. But does anyone remember anything Jason talked about last week in week 1? I know, right? It's and exams. It's too much for your brains. I don't blame you because I barely remembered either. Last week, Jason's big idea was that you're a work in progress. And something he talked about a lot was being in a season of waiting in your life and how God can use that waiting to then help you become the person that he wants you to be. So, working through you in that process. Speaking of waiting, something that you guys are in a season of waiting in, what do you want to be when you grow up? Who has heard that question before? I'm surprised all of you aren't raising your hands. There's most hands, but I'm surprised I don't see all of you because everyone has asked that question, from tiny little children to adults even. I'm in college and I get this question all the time. I think it's sweet though, so I don't get bothered. I think it's nice that they care. But I want to hear your guys' answers. If I were to ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up, what would you say? You want to be Jason when you grow up? Interesting. Anya. Rich. Fair enough. Bella. Happy. John. A hobo. Why? Okay, just cause. Isaac. A welder. Ooh. Max. A plumber. Interesting. Very needed. Any other people want to share? Yes. Some form of artist. That seems accurate to you. I would say, not surprised by that. So I'm sure something I've noticed in asking people this question, I'm sure you guys might have noticed it too, is that you tend to get usually one of two replies. Some people say something that they just think is fun or exciting, and then some people say something that they might feel called to. I know that I've seen this in a lot of people that I've asked. I have a couple friends who are nurses now that originally they always talked about how that was just what they felt called to. That was how they wanted to serve the people around them. That was what led them to nursing. But then I've also just had lots of conversations with friends about fun things like being a flight attendant, because then you get to travel the world and that sounds awesome. And I love traveling, so I would love to do that, stuff like that. Can you recognize the difference there? One that's just something fun, but then one that could be considered your purpose almost because it's your calling. Not that your purpose isn't fun, because your purpose should be fun. It should be exciting to you, but it's more so that's your calling. So you're finding that, or you're finding your excitement through the fact that you're accomplishing that and not just choosing something because it's fun and going from there. So purpose is what we're going to be talking about tonight. And I want to first start by defining what purpose is. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, I went to Google, very simple definition. If you just type in word purpose, this is what comes up, but it's pretty straightforward. So I thought it would be good for us. Purpose is the reason for which something is done or created, or for which something exists. The reason for which something is done or created, or which it exists. Now, oftentimes we question the purpose of things. How many times have you guys been in a situation that you're like, why is this the way that it is? Why do we do this? Like, why did one day someone just decide, oh, we should do it this way, and we all went along with that? Who's asked something like that before? Yeah, I'm right there with you. A lot of times we question just random, almost silly little things. One that I hear a lot is, why should I clean my room if it's just going to get messy again? Which, fair point, but we just question the purpose behind things like that. Sometimes we question things that are a lot deeper in that. For example, especially when there's a lot of difficulty in our lives and our lives are hard, we question the purpose. Like school, for example. Maybe you're in a time period where school is really hard for you. So you're questioning, why is school so hard? Why am I struggling with this so much? Why do I need to do this? I don't understand. Maybe you're asking yourself, why are my parents always fighting? Seems like they're always in arguments and I don't know what's going on there. What's the reason behind that? Maybe you're asking, why am I stuck in this struggle? Because you're fighting something that you've been fighting for such a long time and you don't understand the purpose and you just feel lost. Sometimes that difficulty can lead us to question our lives altogether. What's the point? Why am I here? And that can lead us to question God's part in it too. Why did God create me the way that I am? What is it that he wants me to do with my life? And sometimes we get frustrated. God, why aren't you showing me what it is that you want me to do with my life? And if any of you guys have been there or are currently there now, I want to encourage you guys that I've been there too. I know that it's hard. There was a period of time where I questioned my purpose so much to the point where I actually thought that I didn't have one. I couldn't find any answers from God in terms of what it was that he was calling me to. So I just thought that I didn't have one, which led to me questioning why I was even on this earth. But ultimately, in time, God revealed that he did, in fact, had a purpose for me, and it was much bigger than I expected. And I have shared this before. I think that's part of the reason why he didn't tell me until later on. This was something I struggled with all throughout high school, and then even a little bit before in middle school and a little bit after. I just struggled with this question of purpose for so long. And he didn't tell me because I wasn't ready to know. If he would have told me, like when I was 15 or before that and first started questioning it, I wouldn't have believed him. He needed that time to grow me to become the person that he wanted me to be. So then in time, he could start revealing that purpose for me and I could do the things that he wanted me to do. Today, we're going to be looking at a character in the Bible who God had a big purpose for. We'll be looking at the character of Isaiah. If you don't know who Isaiah is, he is a prophet that we find in the Old Testament. Prophets were the people who were chosen by God to communicate God's words to the people. So whenever there was something that needed to be communicated, God would then speak to the prophet, and then the prophet would speak to the people. And that just kept everything flowing smoothly that way. Now, Isaiah had a really cool encounter with God and just an amazing experience that led to him becoming the prophet that he was. And so I want us to get the chance to read that today. So we'll be in Isaiah 6, if you guys will look with me. It says, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, 'Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory.' At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke." So I'm going to pause just because there's a lot of stuff going on right away, and we might be like, what is this craziness? I'm sure that's what Isaiah was thinking too. So we're seeing, this is Isaiah's perspective. He sees God. So obviously, immediately he's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And then there's seraphim. Seraphim are a kind of angel with him, and they're praising God, but then there's also like thresholds shaking and the temple's filling with smoke. And it's kind of crazy. Isaiah's freaking out a little bit, which we see as we continue reading it. Going on to verse 5, it says, "Woe to me, I cried, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it, he touched my mouth and said, "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for." Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I, send me." He said, "Go and tell this people, be ever hearing but never understanding, be ever seeing but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people calloused, make their ears dull and close their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed." So, looking at these verses, Isaiah is at first understandably freaking out because he knows that he is a man of unclean lips, as he refers to himself, and he lives among a people of unclean lips. Essentially, what he's saying here is he's just recognizing the fact that he is sinful and he lives among sinful people, and God is sinless. So he recognizes that difference there, and he knows that that's not right. But the seraphim brings a coal down, touches his lips, and says, "Your sin is atoned for." Then immediately God says, "I need someone to send. Who shall I send?" And Isaiah accepts the challenge. He says, "Here am I, send me." And then immediately God started communicating to him what it was he wanted him to say to the people. You see, God gave Isaiah a mission, and he took it on willingly. And we see this all throughout Isaiah's life. Isaiah is a very long book in the Old Testament of so many prophecies that Isaiah communicated. I'd encourage you guys to look at it at some point just to see how cool it is. Isaiah always accepted what it was that God communicated to him and always passed it on to the people, even if it was hard. Because there were times where Isaiah communicated good things to the people, really good things, which is something that we'll get to see in just a minute. But then there were also times where he communicated some not so good things to the people. because ultimately, once again, we're sinful people, and God's people were doing wrong things, and they needed to be called out on that. So God just told Isaiah the truth, and he had to speak this truth to the people. And a lot of times, the people did not react well. But Isaiah was faithful, and he followed what God's call was on his life. So, going back to those good things that I talked about earlier, something that we see a lot through Isaiah is his prophecies of pointing to someone to come, which we'll look at a couple passages where that's in today. Starting in Isaiah 42, it says, this is Isaiah speaking from the Lord. He says, "Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations. He will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. In faithfulness he will bring forth justice. He will not falter or be discouraged till he establishes justice on earth. In his teaching the islands will put their hope." So, looking at this is called a messianic prophecy. This is Isaiah is pointing to someone to come, and I'm sure that you can guess who that is, but there's another passage for us to read that can help if there's still some confusion. Going forward a few chapters to Isaiah 53, he continues to say, "He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all." So, looking at these verses, these messianic prophecies pointing to the coming Messiah, who is Isaiah talking about? Jesus, thank you. Basic church answer, no harm in shouting that out. Isaiah is able to find purpose in pointing to Jesus. And that's something that we can do as well, which Jesus actually tells us before, tells his disciples, but then us by association, before he left this earth. So if we go forward many books in the Bible to Matthew chapter 28, this is after Jesus was crucified and resurrected, but shortly before he leaves the earth. This is some of his last words to his disciples. In verse 16, he says, "Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, 'All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age.'" Now, I like this passage because I feel like it kind of serves as a reflection of Isaiah's story in a way. When you look at Isaiah's story, you see how he had this encounter with God, and then that was when God said, "Who shall I send?" And Isaiah said, "Here am I, send me." In these verses, Jesus is having an encounter with his disciples, and he's saying, "I need someone to send. I have good news that needs to be shared. Will you share that good news?" So looking at these verses, this takes us back to the question of purpose. And some of you might say, okay, our purpose is to share Jesus, which it absolutely is, don't get me wrong, but there's one step that needs to be taken before that. You see, looking at Isaiah's life, he didn't know Jesus, or he didn't know his mission until he had that encounter with God. He needed to know God first, and then God was able to give him that mission. Same thing with Jesus' disciples. Jesus' disciples received that mission because they had known and had a relationship with Jesus for years beforehand. They had been a part of his ministry, and all of that started with knowing him first. Your purpose is to know Jesus. Each and every one of you has been called to know Jesus and have a relationship with him. And then as you get to know him more, he will start to reveal to you aspects of your unique purpose and your unique calling, what he has specifically called you to do, because he has specifically called each and every one of you to something amazing. But it all starts with knowing him. This is what I saw ended up happening in my life. This is where I found my hope. I started by first knowing Jesus, and then in time, I was able to continue to branch out and know more about him know more about myself. That wasn't something that I was expecting to see, but as I got to know Jesus more, I started to learn more about the way he created me to be and what it was that he had in store for me. And that led to me finding out what his specific purpose was for me. But I still rest in the fact that my purpose is to know Jesus. And what that does is it gives me space to breathe, space to mess up and make mistakes and try again. Ultimately, I know that I am meant to have a relationship with God and with Jesus, and he will love me through everything. And yes, he will reveal to me those specific things that he has called me to, but it all starts with this. And it's the same for you. Your purpose is to know Jesus. As you know him, he will start to reveal other aspects of your purpose to you, what he has specifically called you to do. So, how do we know Jesus? How do we get to know Jesus? How do we get to know anyone? By spending time with them. So, same thing for Jesus. Spend time with him. And that's my challenge for you guys this week. Each day, I want you to spend a little bit of time with Jesus. Whatever you can make happen, whether that's 5 minutes, maybe you have an hour to spare. I doubt that you have an hour. If you do, that's awesome. But if that's not realistic, then obviously don't set an unrealistic goal for yourself. Whatever it looks like for you, spend some time with Jesus every day this week and ask yourself these questions. Now, there are some handouts in the back. If I could get some leaders to go grab those and hand them out, and a pen to each student as well. And I want this to be your focus as you're spending this time with Jesus. And what exactly does that look like? Whatever you want it to look like, whatever you can do to feel connected to him. So maybe you want to listen to some worship music. Maybe you want to read your Bible. Maybe you want to pray. Maybe you want to draw. Maybe you want to journal. Whatever it is that you feel connected to him, spend that time with him and ask yourself these questions. Firstly, what do I notice about God? So looking at his character and how he is and the fact that we are made in the image of God. So there are a lot of areas where we reflect God's character. So if I'm noticing this about him, what in turn might that mean for me? And then that goes into the next question. What do I notice about myself? So just realizing, why did God create me this way? And what areas do I feel strongly about these things? And what could God be trying to use me for because of those things? What do I notice about the world? So looking around, where do you see an area where there's a need for change? Where do you see something that just breaks your heart and you feel led to do something about it, to change it, and to help? And then what exactly does that look like with the last question of what might God be asking me to do today? And I encourage you to be realistic with this, because if you're looking at the last question, what do I notice about the world? Maybe you notice that there's hunger in the world, and that breaks your heart. What might God be asking me to do today? Solve world hunger? I can't really do that today, and that's understandable. You need to be realistic with yourself. So taking those small steps of listening to what it is that God wants you to do and following through with them. Because those little things that you choose to do now will end up adding up and make something much bigger later on if you continue through with it. There could be something this week that God really wants to communicate to you, and you won't know unless you spend that time with him and listen to him and what he's trying to communicate to you. So my challenge is, are you going to choose to do that? Are you going to choose to spend that time with him? Now, maybe you guys are at this point where you know that there's something specific that God has called you to. Maybe you have a lot of guidance on what exactly that it is that looks like. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you're like, God says he has a purpose for me, but I'm lost right now. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that looks like. Either position, wherever you're at, that is okay. I promise you, God is with you. He is working with you in every single step, and he will continue to reveal these things to you as time goes on. Trust in him, trust in his plan. So whether your life's purpose seems clear, whether it's still kind of blurry, what matters most is that you can rest in this truth, that your purpose is to know Jesus. And as you get to know him better, you can start to get to know yourself better too, which then can help you learn what it is that he has in store for you. Would you pray with me? God, I just want to thank you for bringing us here tonight. I thank you for this time that we have to talk about purpose and the impact that it makes on our lives. God, I thank you for the fact that we're able to find purpose in you. God, so often in this world, we just feel lost and we struggle with not really knowing what it is that you want us to do, God. But I pray that you would help us to just find rest in your presence in those times, trust that you will reveal your plan to us when we're meant to know. And I pray that you would just help us to have confidence in you and confidence when you do start to reveal those things, God, that you will give us everything we need to make it happen. I pray for discussion as we go to small group. I pray that we would just be able to have time of community where we can connect about some of the amazing things that are going on in our lives, but then also some of the really difficult things that are going on in our lives, God. That's what we're here for. And so I pray that we'd be able to come alongside each other in each of those things. God, I thank you for tonight. I pray for exams for everyone, that they can get through the rest of them and it'll all go well. And I pray all this in your name. Amen.